A recent trend in British politics has been a rush to define oneself as centrist in an attempt to win general elections. Miliband, Clegg and Cameron all have different rhetoric aimed directly at the middle classes, which apparently all of Britain identifies itself as. There's plenty of words for this: centre-right, centre-left, progressive, modernisation, third-way, compassionate conservative. It basically all means the same thing, going for the political centre ground. The media happily report that this middle ground is where power in the UK lays. But why? There are lots of reasons, but much of it just goes down to some simple logic and mathematics. First of all, let's establish the rules of the game. There are basically two parties that can conceivably end up winning an election: Labour and the Conservatives. A third party does exist, and indeed they are currently in government, but the Lib Dems are unlikely in the short and medium term to end up in government by themselves, so we'll exclude them for now. So Labour and the Conservatives fight an election hoping to have their candidates become members of Parliament and gain a seat in the House of Commons. It only takes a simple majority to make a law in the UK, so both parties aim for half of all seats in the Commons, right now 326. Whoever has at least that many seats outnumbers all the other parties combined, so that party becomes the government. Turns out that the UK has some regional differences that make Labour very popular in some areas and the Conservatives very popular in the other areas. This results in both parties having at least 160 odd safe seats. That means the election is really played out in only about half the seats, where both parties have a chance. Now, individual seats are awarded by a rather simplistic system. People in a constituency vote for who they want as MP. Whoever gets the most votes becomes the MP. There is absolutely no requirement for them to win a majority of the votes. This is important because it means you can win a seat with as low a percentage of the vote as 10%, provided a dozen or so people won and they all split the vote fairly evenly. This system is called first past the post. The main result of this system, which I hope I can persuade you to accept, is that the only percentage that matters in an election is the gap between the leading party and the second place party. This is pretty intuitive if it's a pure two-party state, and it's still true even if 100 parties are in the contest. If the gap between the two leading parties is very large, then the first place winner will take a majority of seats, perhaps even a landslide, and win an election. As that gap shrinks, that majority shrinks also. So remember, that's the aim of the game. Get as big a gap as possible between you and second place. Now to do so you need votes, which means you need voters. So let's have a look at them. Most people who care about politics identify themselves as left-wing or right-wing. I've already got a video out about why you shouldn't do that, but let's go with it anyway. Let's look at a spectrum of voters from some fictitious country. For now, let's say this country has a completely even spread of the population across the spectrum. Let's set a basic rule, which is that the further someone is from the centre, the more the other side will hate them, and in turn the more likely they are to hate the other side. Now let's generate two completely arbitrary parties. On the left, Party A, and on the right, for neutrality's sake, Party 1. Both sides have two people who represent their natural voter base. They both have one power in an election. With a lot of effort and a lot of money, they can persuade just one adjacent group to vote for them. So Party A throws their resources into getting Mr. Red on their left to vote for them, but Mr. True Blue hates Mr. Red, so decides to back Party 1, just out of spite to Party A. This does not count as Party 1 using up their one extra person, so they use that power to get the centre-right voter, and end up winning more votes and the election. So the centre ground wins in this example. So the next election comes around, and both parties are scared of appealing to the extreme elements for fear of what happened last time repeating itself. So both appeal to the centrist voters. They get a fairly even spread of the vote. All that matters in this case is that you get the voters to actually bother to go out on voting day. Note that this way, neither Mr. Red nor Mr. True Blue are voting for anyone, so by appealing to centrist voters, the parties have a pressed voter turnout. In the event that both parties appeal to ideological purity, then centrist voters end up with no one representing them. they may still want to vote, and if they do, they have to choose the lesser of two evils, whichever they determine that to be. All that matters in this example is who has more voters on their side of the centre. This image represents a polarised political scene. Now let's look at another example. Let's expand the number of stick figures and remove the hate element. Now you can appeal to anyone you like without someone hating you for it. But mathematics still favours centralism, because you can, if you want, throw all your energies at the ideological purists. Every person you gain increases your vote by 1. But remember that what counts in an election is the gap between you and the other side. So instead, you concentrate your energies on stealing voters from the other party. Every time you succeed, you gain a vote. And very importantly, they lose a vote. The gap you gain from doing this is twice what you would have got for ideological purity. Now these can both be applied to real-world politics. Politicians in both parties will hesitate before appealing to the far left or the far right for fear that every vote they gain is offset by an increase in turnout for the other party. Backbenchers can be more left and more right because they only have to appeal to a narrow geographical region. The national leaders need to appeal to the whole country. They also know it's much more valuable to aim for stealing votes from the other party. During the 50s and 60s, voter turnout slowly declined as ideological purity was lost. It then picked up again in the 80s when Thatcher brought the economic right of the Tories back from the dead. There was a brief renewed interest in ideology. When Tony Blair re-energised Labour as a centrist party, it got him 3 election victories, but it also sent voter turnout crashing. That's a major effect of centralism. Voter turnout is oppressed. This example has shown the basic logic why any two-party system inherently favours a moderate, central position for political parties. The UK actually has a much more unique reason added to this, which goes down to its seat system and the regional differences across the country. This will be discussed in part 2.